What's happening? Back with book number 15 for the year. This book is called Jump. It was written by Larry Miller, an executive at Nike, and it was co-written by his daughter, Laila Lacy. Larry Miller is a longtime executive in the sports and fashion world. He's in his 70s, grew up in Philadelphia many generations ago and had a really troubled upbringing. And he managed to go to college, get a great education, and moved up the ranks in the corporate world. Started off in the Philadelphia area and then found his way on the West Coast, working for Nike, also serving as an executive leader for the Portland Trail Blazers for a while, and then going back to Nike and then becoming the president of the Jordan brand. His story is a pretty straightforward story from the outside. A person who goes to college, gets an education, rises up the ranks, and becomes a member of the corporate society. But unbeknownst to most people around him, he had a really large secret. He had a different life that he lived in his teenage years. Ended up serving some time in prison for homicide. And so at the age of 16, maybe 17 years old, he committed a homicide, went to prison, served the sentence. Because he's in his 70s, he grew up in a period before Google. And he also has a common name, Larry Miller. And so a lot of the background checks and the other sort of, due diligences that come along with searching people's names, it never came up. And so his life as a convicted felon was one that only a few people knew about. His daughter, who actually co-wrote the book with him, did not know about it until she became an adult. So he lived his life, for the most part, hiding much of his childhood and teenage years. And the book talks about the balance between growing as an executive, but having this secret inside his heart and his mind and his soul, and rising so high that he was reporting directly to Phil Knight, working with people like Michael Jordan, going to the White House to meet with Barack Obama. So many other instances that he talks about in the book where he could have easily been outed. He passed background checks to get into the White House, Secret Service checks. There were people that he met that were like high-level dignitaries, and no one knew. And as an executive, he broke a lot of ground with his work with Nike and Team Jordan. And he always had this burning desire to give back. But a part of him giving back would have been him disclosing this story, not only of him committing a homicide at 16, but also the other infractions that he found himself a part of as a teenager. Slowly but surely, he began to tell the story, and finally he opened up to his daughter, who suggested that he tell his story on a grand scale. And so that's sort of how this book came about. He went from the streets to the boardroom, and it's a phenomenal story. I would say this book is probably one of the top 3 books that I've read out of the 15 plus that I've read this year. It's just a really intriguing book for me, to see how many close encounters he had with this story being exposed prematurely. Finally, at a certain point, he realizes that his life is not just about him, and that there are other people in the world who could benefit from hearing his story. And so he wrote the book as a result. And he came forth in, I think, October of 2021 and had a press run where he went to the public and talked about his wrongdoings. And again, he served the time, so he's not sidestepping or skating the punishment. He actually did serve the time in prison for the homicide, but as he tried to rehabilitate, he wanted to keep that side of his life to himself, and he felt like that was going to get in the way of his progress. But he ended up, again, revealing that story. This is a good book, I think, in particular for young men, to be more specific, young Black men that come from the streets, whether you've committed a crime that cause you to be arrested or not. Most of us who come from the inner city of big cities, we have friendships and relationships and experiences that sometimes don't jive well with our corporate growth. And he talks a bit about the sacrifices he had to make with respect to relationships and how he felt bad about those sacrifices in his journey to the boardroom. But I think at the same time, for those of us as Black men rising in our careers, there's often this element that we are privileged to have from that sort of street experience that gives us an opportunity to see things from a different lens. And so he took a lot of his street knowledge with him to the boardroom. And now that he's revealed the details and the depths of which he comes from, I think he's been relieved of this very big boulder on his shoulder and this boulder in his heart that was weighing down his well-being. And so for a lot of us, we're forced to code switch. We're forced to put on a different mask, so to speak, in the corporate space. And I think that this book, Jump, is an opportunity for a lot of people, but in particular Black men who are rising up in the corporate structure, to take a look at someone's story, to see that person's resilience and also the internal battle that they have with respect to trying to navigate the world, knowing that their background is not the same as maybe their white counterparts or Asian counterparts in the corporate space. So it's a really good book. I thought it was a book that obviously for him, he needed to put out to put some things to rest. But I think it's also an encouraging message for people who may think that one mistake is holding them back. And he's a prime example of, you could do the worst of the worst so long as you're willing to ask for forgiveness and to correct your wrongs. There's always an opportunity for a second opportunity. And so the book Jump by Larry Miller is a really, really good book. I highly recommend it, but specifically to people who know people who may be trying to polish up their lives. They may be trying to grow out of the neighborhood mentality and go into a space where they can really grow in their careers. So Jump by Larry Miller. It's also written by his daughter, Laila Lacy, who he loves dearly and talks a lot about in the book. So again, Jump by Larry Miller, The Secret Journey from the streets to the boardroom. Highly recommend it. Book 15 for the year for me. As always, if you have read the book, let me know in the comments. If you're interested in reading it, let me know in the comments. Like the page, subscribe to the page, leave a comment. Let me know that you like the story that I told. And if you've read the book, hopefully you liked it. And if you haven't, hopefully you grab it. So until next time, take care.